We live in a civilization that congratulates itself on its progress, on its mastery of science, of technology, of the human mind itself. We speak proudly about breaking addictions, to substances, to habits, to impulses, as if our species were finally growing sober after a long and dangerous intoxication. But the truth is far stranger, and far more unsettling. Because while we celebrate our apparent freedom, we remain completely enslaved by the one addiction that almost no one dares to name. It is not a drug you can swallow, smoke, or inject. It is not a chemical you can outlaw or purify. It is invisible, omnipresent, and rewarded at every level of society. It is the addiction to culture itself, to the stories, symbols, and systems that define the limits of what we call reality. We have been raised inside this addiction for so long that it no longer feels like one. Like a fish that does not notice the water it swims in, we have forgotten that everything we see, everything we think, and everything we believe has been filtered through a shared hallucination. From birth, we are spoon-fed the cultural narcotic. It begins with words, with the mother tongue that installs the basic architecture of perception in our nervous system. As we learn to speak, we also learn what can be thought, and just as importantly, what cannot. Language is the delivery mechanism for culture, and it programs the nervous system to see the world in a specific, limited way. By the time we can walk, the trance is already in place. Culture gives us our sense of meaning, of belonging, of purpose. It tells us who we are and where we are going. It gives us a name, a flag, a job title, a gender, a history, and a destiny. It builds a reality out of thin air and convinces us to worship it as truth. Every screen, every headline, every casual conversation is a small dosage, a hit of the collective drug. We are constantly refreshing our sense of self through cultural participation, checking the news, updating our status, aligning our opinions with the latest trend. Each of these acts feeds the hunger of the cultural organism, keeping it alive and dominant within the human psyche. It's a perfect addiction because it doesn't look like one. There are no shaking hands, no empty bottles, no confessions whispered in shame. Instead, there is only conformity, the smooth rhythm of everyone marching in sync to the same invisible drumbeat. Culture gives us identity, and identity becomes dependency. To question the cultural trance is to risk exile, ridicule, or worse, irrelevance. And so, we defend our addiction as though it were virtue. We call it patriotism, morality, tradition, or productivity. We build elaborate stories to justify the structure that imprisons us, never realizing that the structure feeds on our belief in it. Terence McKenna once said, "Culture is not your friend." What he meant was not that culture is evil, but that it is a system indifferent to your awakening. Culture is a software running on the hardware of human consciousness. Its goal is continuity, not truth, replication, not revelation. It doesn't want you to question its operating system. It wants you to consume, to reproduce, to maintain the illusion of consensus reality. Like any good addiction, it promises comfort while quietly draining vitality. And the deeper the dependency, the more invisible it becomes. Look around. Entire economies are built on sustaining this trance. Advertising doesn't sell products. It sells meaning. News doesn't deliver information. It delivers emotional reinforcement loops that keep you tethered to the collective narrative. Even our ideas of success, happiness, and freedom are prepackaged illusions designed to keep the cultural machinery running smoothly. We chase dreams that are not ours, defend values we did not choose, and fear the collapse of systems that have no real existence outside of shared imagination. The addiction to culture manifests as a deep restlessness, the sense that we must always be doing something, becoming someone, or staying updated. We scroll endlessly through digital landscapes, searching for novelty, for something to fill the invisible void left by our disconnection from direct experience. The irony is profound. The more information we consume, the less we actually perceive. We mistake data for wisdom, stimulation for meaning, participation for presence. Our attention, the most sacred resource of consciousness, has become the commodity traded by the priests of this new religion. And like all addictions, this one numbs the very pain it creates. We fear silence, so we fill it with noise. We fear uncertainty, so we drown it in opinion. We fear the vastness of our own being, so we cling to the smallness of cultural identity. The modern world is a kaleidoscope of distraction, a carefully engineered sensory overload that prevents us from noticing the simplest truth: that reality, unmediated by culture, is infinitely more mysterious and alive than anything our myths could describe. What would it mean to detox from culture? To see without interpretation? To exist without the scaffolding of constant explanation? It would be you can breathe reality directly, without the filter of the cultural drug. But withdrawal will come. Culture does not release its devotees easily. When you stop playing the game, the noise will grow louder. You'll feel the pressure to rejoin, to re-identify, to be someone again. You will be told that your silence is apathy, that your detachment is madness. Yet it is in that silence that the first clear breath of awareness arrives, the moment you realize you are not the mask. The entire edifice of civilization begins to look less like progress and more like theater. A grand performance built to distract the divine imagination of humanity from its own infinite nature. This is the secret that the addiction conceals, that you are not dependent on culture. Culture is dependent on you. Without your belief, your participation, your attention, it collapses into nothing. Every idea, every symbol, every institution only exists because consciousness continues to feed it energy. Once you see this, the spell begins to break. The walls of the cultural trance become transparent, and light begins to leak through the cracks. Humanity's greatest addiction is not to substances, but to meaning, the compulsion to interpret, to categorize, to believe that we know what is happening. Culture offers the illusion of safety through consensus, but it costs us the raw, unfiltered miracle of being alive. To awaken from this addiction is not to reject culture entirely, but to see it for what it is, a costume worn by eternity for the brief dance of human history. The hidden drug of culture keeps us dreaming that we are separate, that we are progressing, that we are civilized. But beneath the trance, something ancient and infinite is still awake. The same awareness that looked out of the first human eyes, that whispered through the first fires, that still watches now through the blue glow of our screens. It waits for us to remember that we were never meant to serve the dream. We were meant to wake up inside it. Culture is not just a collection of customs and symbols. It is a living architecture of consciousness, an invisible cathedral built from the language we speak and the assumptions we never question. It is the software of the collective mind, silently running in the background of every human thought. It defines the boundaries of the possible, the believable, and the sacred. And like any architecture, it has foundations, made not of stone or steel, but of words, habits, and the endless repetition of ideas so ancient that we have forgotten they were ever invented. From the moment we are born, the trance begins. We are surrounded by faces that already belong to the dream: parents, teachers, leaders, each carrying the operating system of culture in their nervous systems. They don't mean harm. They are simply passing down the same code that was passed to them. The lullabies, the fairy tales, the bedtime stories. These are not innocent entertainments. They are the first downloads of myth into the human psyche. They install the coordinates of belief. What is good? What is evil? What is real? By the time we are old enough to question, the architecture is already complete around us, invisible and unshakable. The trance is self-reinforcing. Every word you speak feeds it, because language is its bloodstream. McKenna once said that culture is a closed loop of habitual behaviors enforced by social expectation. He was right. You need not believe in a dictator when you have the prison of conformity. You need not be chained when the walls are made of symbols that you mistake for truth. The genius of culture is that it turns its prisoners into guards. Each person polices the boundaries of the dream, ensuring that no one strays too far into forbidden thought. And what is forbidden thought? It is the idea that reality might be far stranger, far freer than what we have been told. Culture's architecture has many rooms. One is religion, where belief becomes the currency of belonging. Another is politics, where disagreement is carefully orchestrated to sustain the illusion of choice. Another is economics, where value is translated into numbers, and numbers become the new gods. Together, these chambers form the maze in which the human spirit wanders, seeking meaning while unknowingly feeding the structure that drains it. The media serves as the nervous system of this architecture, transmitting signals of fear and desire through the collective body. Schools become its temples, where obedience is disguised as education. Corporations are its high priests, distributing the sacrament of consumption. And the digital world is its newest altar, glowing with the seductive promise of infinite connection while deepening the isolation of the individual. We don't just live in culture, we live through it. It mediates every sensory experience. You never see a sunset directly. You see it through the idea of beauty that culture has taught you to recognize. You never feel grief purely. You feel it through the template of tragedy your society has prescribed. Even love, the most intimate of human experiences, is shaped by narratives of romance and ownership that were scripted centuries ago. The trance runs deep, and it runs silently. You cannot escape what you cannot see. What makes this architecture so resilient is that it promises security. Culture tells you that meaning is already established, that you don't need to face the terrifying openness of existence. It provides maps, hierarchies, and a ready-made purpose. It says, here is who you are, here is what matters, here is the story of the world, and in return, all it asks is your faith. It is a small price to pay, until you realize that the cost is your own direct relationship with the unknown. For culture cannot coexist with mystery. It must define, categorize, and reduce everything to fit its architecture. And so, every experience that cannot be explained is either ignored or pathologized. Every thought that cannot be monetized is dismissed as madness. To see the architecture is to feel it tremble. The first cracks appear when you begin to notice the patterns, how the same archetypes repeat endlessly under different names. The hero, the villain, the savior, the enemy, the promise of progress, the fear of collapse. These are the building blocks of the human dream, endlessly recycled to maintain continuity. When one story loses its power, another rises to replace it, carrying the same hidden code. Culture evolves only in appearance. Its underlying function remains the same, to keep consciousness identified with form, story, and separation. The trance has grown even more sophisticated in the digital age. The architecture has become fractal, infinite reflections of itself inside every screen. The algorithms that govern our feeds are not mechanical accidents. They are cultural amplification devices, designed to feed us back our own biases, reinforcing the boundaries of the dream. The more we engage, the deeper the feedback loop becomes. We live in echo chambers, not because of technology, but because of culture's craving for self-similarity. It abhors the unknown. It prefers familiarity over truth. And so the architecture becomes a mirror maze, each reflection leading us deeper into the illusion of certainty. Language itself is both the foundation and the lock. Every word we use shapes reality like an invisible sculptor. The word nature, for example, creates a boundary between us and it. The word future traps us in linear time, convincing us that salvation lies ahead rather than within. Even the word I is a kind of spell, a linguistic trick that isolates consciousness into a single perspective. Culture builds its architecture through these spells, and we recite them unconsciously every day. To awaken is to begin hearing language as what it truly is. The first virtual reality, the original simulation, the blueprint of the trance. This architecture feeds on attention. Where your awareness goes, the structure strengthens. That's why silence and solitude are considered dangerous in a hyperactive civilization. To be alone, to stop participating, even briefly, is to deprive the architecture of its nourishment. The trance begins to flicker, when you withdraw your attention from it. For the first time, you can feel the stillness beneath the noise, the raw texture of being that culture can neither define nor own. This is why ancient mystics and visionaries retreated into deserts and mountains, not to escape the world, but to see it without the overlay. In silence, the architecture of culture reveals itself as transparent scaffolding around something vast and luminous. But the trance fights back. It whispers through others. Don't fall behind. Don't be strange. Don't question too much. It mocks the seeker, labels the dissenter, and rewards the conformist. It offers distractions for every doubt and entertainment for every moment of awakening. It tells you that meaning lies in participation, in productivity, in belonging. And yet, no matter how much you achieve or accumulate, the hunger remains, because the architecture cannot fill the void it creates. To see this is to begin reclaiming your sovereignty of mind. The walls of the cultural trance are not solid. They are made of attention, and attention can be withdrawn. When you stop identifying with the roles and labels assigned to you, when you begin to experience life directly, rather than through the filters of expectation, the architecture starts to dissolve. You realize that the world is not a fixed construct, but a living process, constantly being born in each moment of awareness. Culture fears this realization more than anything, because it means the end of its dominion. An awakened mind cannot be manipulated by symbols or controlled by narratives. It becomes unpredictable, creative, alive, a threat to the machinery of consensus. McKenna once said that the real revolution is not political, but ontological. It is the revolution of perception itself, the breaking of the spell that keeps humanity dreaming inside its own creations. The architecture of the trance is ancient, yes, but it is not indestructible. It exists only as long as we believe in it. The moment we stop feeding it, our unquestioned obedience, it begins to crumble like mist under sunlight. And what lies beyond the ruins is not chaos, as culture would have you believe, but freedom, the unmediated awareness of the living cosmos. The mind, once freed from its linguistic cage, becomes what it always was, a mirror of the infinite. So look carefully at the architecture that surrounds you, the words you use, the stories you tell, the fears that guide your decisions. See how each one reinforces the trance, and then, gently, step outside of it. Not by rebellion, not by destruction, but by seeing it clearly for what it is, a dream within consciousness. Once you see the dream, you are no longer bound by it. You are the dreamer, and the dream itself begins to awaken. Once, long ago, the storytellers were the shamans. Around the ancient fire, they wove the myths that bound the tribe to the stars, that connected human beings to the unseen currents of spirit and nature. Their words were medicine, not entertainment. They told stories not to distract, but to heal, to remind their people of the mystery pulsing behind the veil of appearances. But something changed. The sacred function of story was hijacked, and in its place arose a new priesthood, one not of spirit, but of signal. The media has become the new temple, and the screen its glowing altar. This is the priesthood of the modern world, the invisible curators of collective attention. They decide what is real, what is urgent, what is worthy of outrage or reverence. They determine which events are broadcast and which are buried, which voices are amplified and which are silenced. The media does not merely report the world, it constructs it, image by image, headline by headline. Reality has become a kind of film playing across the collective retina of humanity, and those who control the light determine what the masses see. And yet, most people do not recognize this priesthood for what it is. They believe they are informed, that they are participating in the great dialogue of democracy, of civilization. But what they are really doing is worshipping, kneeling before the machinery of cultural hypnosis, mistaking information for wisdom and opinion for thought. The priests of the new temple discovered long ago that fear and anger are the most efficient fuels. Joy, peace, contemplation, these do not keep the machine alive. But panic does. Division does. The endless conflict of opinion, ensures that no one ever steps outside the theatre to notice the projector. The more fragmented the collective mind becomes, the more dependent it grows on the very medium that fractures it. It is a brilliant form of control, not by censorship, but by saturation. The media's purpose is no longer to reveal truth, but to manufacture consent. It creates the illusion of participation by offering endless options within the same controlled spectrum. You can choose your preferred narrative, your chosen outrage, your tribal alignment, left or right, skeptic or believer, victim or victor. But the frame itself remains untouched. Like a game with fixed rules, the media allows debate only within boundaries that preserve its own existence. To question the medium itself is to step outside the temple, and that is heresy. The ancient shamans used stories to reconnect people to the totality of experience, to remind them that life was more than the sum of its appearances. The modern media does the opposite. It fragments reality into consumable pieces, packages it for emotional efficiency, and sells it back to us as if it were truth. In this way, it sustains the addiction to culture described before, keeping the human spirit sedated with a constant drip feed of stimulation. We no longer look at the world directly. We look at representations of the world curated by those who profit from our gaze. And the great paradox is that we believe ourselves free because we can choose our distractions. We call it free speech, free press, freedom of information. But freedom is meaningless if consciousness itself is colonized. The media tells us what to fear, what to desire, what to expect. It programs our collective nervous system with cycles of anxiety and anticipation. The news cycle becomes a form of temporal hypnosis. Yesterday's crisis evaporates into today's scandal, leaving no time for reflection, no space for silence. Time itself has become a media product, constantly refreshed, endlessly consumed, never digested. McKenna often said that culture is a perversion of the natural order, and nowhere is this clearer than in our relationship with media. Nature communicates through silence, through the subtle rhythms of wind and light. Media communicates through noise. It is the constant hum of civilization's nervous system, drowning out the whisper of the real. The forest teaches patience. The feed demands reaction. The cosmos invites awe. The timeline demands opinion. Every sacred impulse is inverted, every deep truth reduced to spectacle. We are told this is progress, that the world is more connected than ever. But connection without consciousness is not unity, it is entanglement. The web of media that envelops the planet does not unite humanity in understanding, it fuses us in confusion. Billions of minds synchronize to the same frequencies of fear, outrage, and stimulation. The same headlines pulse across continents. The same images ignite the same emotional responses in millions of nervous systems simultaneously. This is not communication. It is entrainment, a psychic synchronization to the rhythm of the machine. And yet, it is so seductive. The glow of the screen replaces the glow of the fire. The flicker of the pixels replaces the flicker of the stars. We turn to our devices for guidance, for meaning, for companionship. We scroll through the modern scripture, the endless scroll of headlines and images, hoping to feel alive, to feel informed, to feel part of something larger. But what we are part of is not a community of awakening, it is a cult of distraction. The media, as the new priesthood, functions by maintaining a state of perpetual crisis. The mind addicted to crisis is a mind that cannot rest, cannot see clearly. It becomes reactive, fragmented, dependent on the next update. The priests of the screen understand this. They know that an anxious population is an obedient one. And so, reality is presented as an endless emergency. You must stay tuned, stay alert, stay informed, as if missing a single headline would endanger your existence. But the real danger is the erosion of the ability to experience the world without mediation. In this way, the media priesthood achieves what ancient religions could only dream of: total attention. The worship is constant and unconscious. You do not need to kneel, you only need to scroll. Every gesture, every tap, every refresh is a small act of devotion. The temple follows you everywhere, in your pocket, on your wrist, beside your bed. You wake to its sermons and fall asleep to its chants. It knows your desires better than you do, and it shapes them accordingly. You are not the audience, you are the product, the resource mined from the depths of your own awareness. And yet, even within this digital labyrinth, a few still awaken. They begin to see the pattern, how every outrage fades, how every story loops back to the same emotional circuitry. They sense the exhaustion beneath the stimulation, the emptiness beneath the noise. When that awareness dawns, something ancient stirs. The same instinct that drove the first shamans into the wilderness calls the modern seeker to silence, to step away from the glow and into the dark, where real vision begins. To detox from media is to reclaim the sacred function of story. It is to listen again to narratives that are not manufactured but discovered. The stories told by the wind through trees, the slow unfolding of the night sky, the mythic intelligence woven into dreams. These are not the stories of control, they are the stories of communion. They do not demand attention, they invite presence. They do not divide the world into headlines and categories, they reveal it as a living, breathing mystery. The true priest is no longer the one who speaks, but the one who listens. The one who remembers that before there was media, before there was culture, there was the cosmos itself, radiating meaning through silence, through direct experience. To step outside the temple of media is not to reject information, but to rediscover wisdom. It is to see that reality does not need to be broadcast to be real, that truth does not need to trend to be known. The new priesthood is powerful, yes, but it is also fragile. Its control depends entirely on our participation. The moment we withdraw our attention, the temples begin to crumble. The feed fades to static, and in that silence, we can finally hear again the ancient hum of being. Beneath the noise, the world has been waiting, vast, luminous, unmediated. And there, in the raw immediacy of experience, the trance breaks. The screen darkens. The fire returns. The story that was never told begins to whisper itself once more. Time is the invisible cage of civilization. It surrounds us so completely that we have mistaken its rhythm for the rhythm of life itself. From the moment we wake to the sound of an alarm clock, until the moment we surrender to the exhaustion of night, we are prisoners of a linear narrative called progress. We have built temples to this god of hours and minutes, calendars, schedules, deadlines and countdowns. We live inside the hypnosis of chronology, believing that our value, our meaning, our very existence must always be measured against the ticking of an artificial clock. Yet the deeper truth is that time, as culture defines it, is not a law of nature, but a cultural hallucination, a lens through which we have been taught to see the world, a structure of control disguised as inevitability. To understand this trap, you must first feel how deeply it runs. From childhood, we are taught to orient our identity around the timeline. You are young, they say. You will grow up, get educated, get a job, achieve something, retire, and then you will rest. Every human life is forced into this linear script, as if consciousness itself were a line marching towards some distant horizon of fulfillment. Time becomes a conveyor belt, moving us from one box to the next, each labeled with expectation and duty. And in the name of this illusion, we sacrifice the present, the only thing that has ever truly existed. Culture's addiction to time is an addiction to becoming. We have forgotten how to be because we are obsessed with what comes next. Progress has become our theology. Every second must be productive, every hour accounted for. Stillness is guilt, rest is laziness. Even spiritual seeking becomes infected by the disease of time. We speak of evolution, of higher stages, of levels of consciousness, as though the infinite were some distant goal instead of the space we already occupy. We have turned the eternal into a project plan. The clock was humanity's first digital god. Before machines ruled our attention, the measurement of time ruled our souls. When the mechanical clock was invented in the Middle Ages, it transformed more than the marketplace. It transformed the mind. For the first time, reality was chopped into measurable fragments. The heartbeat of the cosmos was replaced by the heartbeat of industry. People began to think of life not as an unfolding mystery, but as a sequence of events that could be planned, optimized, monetized. Time became capital, and consciousness became labor. This is the foundation of modern culture, the economy of time. Everything is translated into its temporal value. How long does it take? How fast can it grow? How soon can it deliver? Even our pleasures are scheduled, our love quantified, our creativity timed. The language of clocks has replaced the language of eternity. And beneath this arithmetic of existence, a subtle anxiety hums. The sense that we are always late, that life is slipping away, that there is never enough time. This anxiety is not a flaw of modern life. It is the mechanism by which the system sustains itself. For a mind trapped in the pursuit of time can never be still enough to see that time itself is the trap. We think of time as something flowing from the past into the future, carrying us helplessly forward like leaves on a river. But this is a story told by culture, not a truth of the cosmos. In reality, the past and future exist only as ideas, shadows cast by memory and anticipation. What truly exists is the eternal unfolding of now, an infinite field of presence that culture teaches us to ignore. The illusion of linear time allows the machinery of civilization to keep turning, because only a species convinced of scarcity can be controlled. The scarcity of time, the myth that there is not enough of it, fuels competition, anxiety, and consumption. It keeps us chasing moments instead of inhabiting them. Technology has intensified the hypnosis. The pace of life accelerates with every new invention meant to save time. We travel faster, communicate faster, process information faster, and yet we feel perpetually behind. The more efficiently we move through the illusion, the more enslaved we become to its rhythm. We live in a culture that equates speed with intelligence, efficiency with virtue, productivity with meaning. But none of these things bring us closer to reality. They only tighten the loop of addiction. Like a gambler chasing the next win, humanity races toward a future that never arrives, unaware that it is running on a treadmill of its own making. Even our concept of death is shaped by this temporal trance. We fear the end because we believe the story of life must reach a conclusion. But in truth, consciousness does not begin or end. It only changes form, like waves folding into the sea. The fear of running out of time is the fear of losing the illusion of control. Culture teaches us that life is a finite commodity, that existence must be measured and maximized. This belief has stripped us of our sense of wonder. It is what drives empires, economies, and wars. The desperate attempt to outrun mortality through accumulation, invention, and legacy. But nothing eternal needs to be remembered. Only illusions fear being forgotten. There is a deeper rhythm beneath the ticking clock, a pulse that belongs not to civilization, but to the cosmos itself. You can feel it in the breath, in the movement of clouds, in the slow drift of stars across the night sky. This rhythm does not hurry. It does not measure. It does not promise. It simply is. The earth spins, the seasons change, the heart beats, all without effort, without agenda. This is what McKenna meant when he said that the universe is not made of time, but of process. Reality is not a line. It is a spiral, a fractal wave of recurrence and renewal. But we have flattened this wave into a calendar, stripped it of mystery, and imprisoned ourselves within its straight edges. The psychedelic experience reveals this distortion with merciless clarity. When the veil of cultural time dissolves, you realize that eternity is not infinite duration, but infinite depth. One moment can contain the whole cosmos. Time stretches, folds, disappears. You see how the ego's desperate clinging to sequence, to before and after, to cause and effect, is a defense against the immensity of the present. The mind fears timelessness, because in timelessness there is no I to measure or to control. Yet it is in that surrender that true freedom begins. The timeless state is not an escape from life, but a return to its essence. The realization that existence has never been happening in time. Time has been happening in existence. To awaken from the time trap is to reclaim your sovereignty of attention. Every time you pause, breathe, and feel the present moment without trying to capture it, you are stepping outside the cage. In that stillness, the illusion of urgency dissolves. You begin to see that nothing real can ever be lost, and nothing essential can ever be rushed. The river of time continues to flow, but you no longer identify with the current. You become the water itself, fluid, silent, aware. But culture fears this awareness. An awakened being cannot be exploited by the scarcity of time. You cannot sell more hours to someone who knows that eternity is here and now. You cannot control a mind that measures value in presence rather than productivity. That is why modern civilization wages war against stillness. The system must keep you moving, distracted, reaching, consuming, because the moment you stop, you see through the illusion. You realize that the empire of clocks is built on nothing but the collective refusal to rest. McKenna once said that what we call history is the record of our struggle with the imagination. The time trap is part of that struggle, a self-imposed hallucination meant to contain the infinite creativity of consciousness. But the walls are transparent. If you look closely, you can see them trembling. Beneath every deadline, every goal, every ticking clock, there is a doorway to the timeless. It waits patiently, hidden in plain sight, in the breath, in the silence between thoughts, in the pause before action. When you step through that doorway, you discover that you were never truly in time. You were always in eternity, dreaming of clocks. The entire machinery of cultural temporality collapses like smoke, revealing a vast expanse of still awareness where nothing needs to happen because everything already is. The addiction to time dissolves, and what remains is freedom. Not the freedom to do anything, but the freedom from needing to do anything at all. And so, the invitation is simple yet profound. Stop running. Stop measuring. Stop counting. For the truth is not somewhere in the future waiting to be reached. The truth is the silence behind the ticking, the space within which all moments arise and fall. To remember this is to awaken from the trance of history itself. You step out of the line and into the circle. You remember that the real clock has no hands, and the only time that ever existed was now. There comes a point in the journey of awareness when the old structures begin to crumble. The narratives lose their shine. The media's endless pulse of information begins to sound like static. The promises of progress, wealth, and belonging ring hollow. It is a quiet unraveling, not dramatic, not violent, but something more intimate. A realization seeps in that what we have been calling reality is a domesticated dream, a cultivated hallucination carefully trimmed to fit the dimensions of culture. Beneath it lies something older, wilder, ungoverned, a mind unconditioned by story, unmeasured by time, untouched by control. This is the wild mind, the original state of consciousness before civilization wrapped it in scripts and symbols. To remember, it is to wake up from history itself. The wild mind is not a concept or an idea. It is the living intelligence of the universe moving through you. It is the part of you that the modern world has spent millennia trying to silence. In the city, its voice is drowned out by engines and notifications. In education, it is suppressed by structure and certainty. The wild mind speaks in intuition, in sudden knowing, in dreams, in the language of wind and water. It does not plan or calculate. It responds and flows. Before there were words, before there were beliefs, there was this, pure awareness encountering the mystery of existence without filters. But culture fears the wild. It fears what cannot be domesticated, categorized, or monetized. So it trains us to mistrust our own direct experience, to look outward for validation instead of inward for truth. We were not born to live in mental cages. Yet from childhood, we are taught to exchange our inner wilderness for the safety of order. We learn to speak, and with language comes separation. The world becomes divided into names and labels, and the raw unity of perception is lost. We learn to obey, to sit still, to focus, to compete. Every instinct that connects us to the living cosmos is slowly replaced by rules of conduct and systems of measurement. The wild mind is exiled, banished to the unconscious, where it whispers through dreams and longings. The ache you feel when you look at the stars, the sense of nostalgia for something you cannot name. Civilization calls that nostalgia escapism. But what you are trying to escape is not reality. It is the simulation of reality. Terence McKenna often said that the psychedelic experience was not about seeing visions, but about remembering what had been forgotten. Under the influence of plant intelligence, the walls of culture dissolve, and the wild mind steps forward. You remember it knows that existence is not a ladder to climb, but a symphony to join. Every creature, every atom, every heartbeat contributes to this cosmic music. To remember the wild mind is to hear that music again. But rewilding consciousness is not without danger. The mind that has been conditioned by culture resists the call of freedom. It clings to structure, to identity, to certainty. The first steps into the wilderness of the psyche can feel like madness. You begin to question everything, your beliefs, your desires, even your sense of self. It is a kind of death, a dismantling of the artificial scaffolding that once held your reality together. The domesticated mind will whisper in fear, "You are losing yourself." But what you are losing is not yourself, it is your conditioning. The wild mind is not chaos, it is order beyond control, harmony beyond hierarchy. It is intelligence free from manipulation, awareness liberated from narrative. To remember the wild mind is to return to a different kind of knowing, one that does not depend on explanation. It is the knowing of the body, the senses, the intuition. It is the awareness that every breath is sacred, that every moment is alive with presence. When you stand in a forest and feel the pulse of the earth under your feet, when you look at the stars and sense the infinite looking back through you, that is the wild mind awakening. It is not something to be achieved, but something to be uncovered, like sunlight breaking through clouds that were never really there. Culture tells you that you are small, isolated, insignificant, a brief flicker of consciousness in a cold, indifferent universe. The wild mind knows otherwise. It remembers that consciousness is not confined to the human skull, that we are expressions of a vast cosmic imagination dreaming itself into form. To live from this remembrance is to no longer see the world as out there, separate from the self. The boundaries dissolve. The air becomes intimate. The stars become kin. You realize that what you call nature is not your environment, but your identity. You are the universe remembering itself through human eyes. This remembrance is not a retreat from civilization, but a rebalancing of it. When the wild mind returns, creativity awakens. You begin to act not out of fear or ambition, but out of participation in the living mystery. You no longer seek meaning as something to acquire. You create meaning through being. Art, music, love, and laughter flow effortlessly because they are expressions of that wild intelligence moving through you. Even ordinary tasks become sacred when performed from presence. Washing dishes, walking down a street, breathing. The wild mind does not divide the world into sacred and profane. It sees all of it as one continuous act of creation. But to sustain this awareness in a culture addicted to control requires courage. The world will try to pull you back into the trance. It will tempt you with distractions, threaten you with irrelevance, seduce you with belonging. It will call your silence apathy, your freedom rebellion, your stillness failure. But the wild mind has no need for approval. It does not perform. It simply is. It watches the drama of culture unfold like a passing storm, knowing that beyond the noise, the sky remains untouched. The more you rest in that awareness, the less power the storm holds. Eventually, you begin to see that the wild mind is not something you must reach. It was never gone. It was simply covered by layers of conditioning, waiting for you to stop searching long enough to notice. You rediscover that intuition is not superstition, but direct communication with the intelligence of life itself. You realize that the language of nature, the patterns of waves, the flight of birds, the cycles of the moon, is the same language your own body speaks. When you breathe in rhythm with the world, when you let go of the need to control the story, you find yourself moving in harmony with something vast, graceful, and ancient. This is not the end of civilization, but the beginning of its healing. Because only when individuals remember their wildness can culture itself be renewed. A society disconnected from nature becomes insane, obsessed with consumption, addicted to speed, terrified of silence. But when people remember their roots in the living cosmos, compassion returns, balance returns. The artificial boundaries between self and world, human and nature, begin to dissolve. Culture can then become what it was meant to be, not a prison, but a song, not a system of control, but a vessel for communion. To remember the wild mind is to remember that freedom was never lost. It was only forgotten under the noise of civilization's machinery. You don't have to flee the world to find it. You simply have to listen. Listen to the silence beneath the language, to the intelligence humming inside your breath, to the whisper of the ancient consciousness that has never been domesticated. It is calling you home, back to the source, back to the living, breathing mystery that has been waiting patiently beneath the surface of culture's illusion. And when you finally stop running, when you sit in stillness and let the wild mind rise, you will see the truth that culture cannot speak, that you were never separate from nature, never divided from the divine, never outside of the whole. You are the forest dreaming of itself. You are the sky remembering it can fly. The wild mind has always been here, watching, waiting, infinite. And the moment you remember it, the walls of the trance crumble, and life, in all its unfathomable beauty, begins again. At some point on the path of awakening, there comes a silence so deep it feels like falling through the floor of reality. The noise of the world fades, the opinions, the politics, the endless commentary of civilization, and what remains is a vast, unnameable awareness. It is not the absence of meaning, but the presence of everything. This is what waits beyond the walls of culture. Not chaos, not madness, but liberation. The freedom that comes when you realize that culture, language, time, and identity were never cages built around you, but illusions projected by the mind within you. When this is seen clearly, the spell breaks. The architecture of the trance dissolves, and consciousness stands naked in its original light. This liberation is not an event, not a sudden explosion of enlightenment. It is more like remembering something so obvious that it had been overlooked for a lifetime. You realize that you were never trapped inside culture. Culture was trapped inside you. Its symbols, its fears, its rules were patterns of thought, and thought was never real in the way the sky is real, or the sound of wind, or the feeling of being alive. The entire edifice of civilization, for all its apparent power, existed only as long as you believed in its story. The moment you withdraw that belief, the illusion collapses, and in that collapse, you find not emptiness, but infinity. We are taught to fear this infinity. Culture paints the unknown as dangerous, the unstructured as insane. It tells us that without its guidance, we would descend into chaos. But this is projection, the fear of the mind losing control over what it never truly possessed. The truth is that beyond culture lies not disorder, but natural intelligence, the same intelligence that orchestrates galaxies, births stars, and guides the growth of a seed into a forest. This intelligence does not require permission, doctrine, or hierarchy. It flows effortlessly, guided by the inherent harmony of being itself. When you step beyond culture, you rejoin that flow. You are no longer a citizen of civilization, but a participant in creation. It is strange to discover how much of what we called self was merely cultural residue. the personality, the ambitions, even the emotional vocabulary we use to describe ourselves. All of it borrowed, second-hand, inherited from a collective dream. When the trance lifts, you can feel the weight of those borrowed identities slipping away. You begin to remember how to be without explanation. The need to perform dissolves. The need to prove or justify your existence evaporates. What remains is simple presence, awareness without an agenda. This is not passivity, it is power beyond the reach of control. Because the self that emerges here is not separate from the world. It is the world, awake to itself. McKenna spoke often about this state, the archaic revival, as he called it. A return not to primitive ignorance, but to direct participation in the mystery of being. It is the reawakening of the unconditioned human spirit, freed from the linguistic hallucination of culture. He believed that this liberation was not just personal, but planetary, that the next step in human evolution would not come from machines or ideologies, but from a mass remembering of our true nature. The species would awaken from its self-imposed hypnosis and realize that it had always been free. And this awakening, he said, would feel like the end of history, because history itself was the story told by the dream of culture. To live beyond culture does not mean to reject it violently or to escape into isolation. Rebellion, after all, is still a form of participation. It defines itself by what it opposes. True liberation is gentler, quieter, more subversive. It happens when you stop feeding the illusion with your belief, when you no longer react to the machinery of society, when you no longer seek validation from its systems of approval, when you no longer identify with its definitions of success or failure. In that moment, culture loses its power over you. You have stepped into a different order of reality, one that culture cannot perceive because it is not built from symbols. It is made of awareness itself. In this space, life becomes astonishingly simple. You wake, you breathe, you move through the day with a sense of deep belonging. The world is no longer divided into good or bad, right or wrong, sacred or profane. Everything simply is. The breeze against your face is revelation. The sound of rain on a window becomes scripture. You no longer seek transcendence because nothing needs to be transcended. The miracle of existence is enough. This is the quiet ecstasy that civilization has forgotten. The joy of being alive without reason, without purpose, without story. But don't mistake this for apathy. The liberated mind does not retreat from the world. It moves through it with grace. It acts without attachment, loves without possession, creates without fear. Compassion arises naturally because there is no longer a boundary between self and other. The suffering of the world is felt as your own, and so you respond, not out of obligation or ideology, but out of direct empathy. You become an instrument of the same intelligence that flows through all things. Your life ceases to be about survival or achievement. It becomes an expression of love. Culture, of course, will not understand this. It will look at such liberation and see irresponsibility, madness, or heresy. But that is because culture cannot comprehend a freedom that does not depend on its rules. It fears what it cannot control. It will try to pull you back with promises of security, belonging, meaning, the same promises it has always made and never kept. But once you have tasted what lies beyond, those promises sound hollow. You see that the security of culture is a cage, that belonging within it means forgetting your own vastness. And so you smile gently at its attempts to reclaim you, knowing that you no longer need to fight it. A dream cannot imprison the dreamer once the dreamer has awakened. This liberation also reveals a profound paradox. Once you see through culture, you can finally participate in it consciously. You can play the game without being deceived by it. You can speak the language without believing in its absolutes. You can wear the mask knowing it's a mask. In that sense, freedom does not mean withdrawal from the world, but mastery within it. The awakened being becomes an artist, using the symbols of culture as instruments of expression rather than instruments of control. You are no longer consumed by the story. You are the storyteller. And as you live from this awareness, you begin to sense something extraordinary. Culture itself begins to transform around you. Every mind that wakes up sends ripples through the collective field of humanity. The dream adjusts, the frequency shifts. The walls that once seemed solid begin to shimmer. The machinery of fear and control weakens. New patterns of cooperation, creativity, and compassion emerge spontaneously, as if reality itself were reorganizing around this new awareness. McKenna hinted that this could be humanity's destiny, that culture would one day dissolve not through collapse, but through evolution, through the awakening of consciousness within it. Liberation, then, is not the destruction of culture, but its redemption. When the dreamer awakens within the dream itself becomes lucid. Civilization need not fall. It can remember. The structures that once imprisoned us can become expressions of beauty and wisdom. Technology, language, and art can be transformed from tools of control into mirrors of truth. When culture is infused with awareness, it becomes transparent, a shimmering reflection of the infinite rather than a substitute for it. In the end, the liberation beyond culture is not about escaping the human condition, but embracing it fully, with eyes open and heart awake. You realize that the entire journey, the trance, the addiction, the struggle, was never a mistake. It was part of the unfolding of consciousness learning to see itself. Culture, with all its illusions and limits, was a necessary dream, a bridge across the abyss of forgetfulness. Through it, we learned contrast. We learned the cost of separation so that we could rediscover unity. And now, standing on the edge of that dream, we are invited to remember what we truly are. The liberation beyond culture is not somewhere else, waiting in another dimension or future age. It is here, in this breath, in this seeing. It begins when you stop believing that you are a product of history and start remembering that you are the witness of it. When you rest in that awareness, the world reveals its true face, not a battlefield, but a dance, not a prison, but a playground, not a story of suffering, but a symphony of becoming. And perhaps that is the final secret McKenna was always pointing toward, that the end of culture is not the end of humanity, but the beginning of what humanity was always meant to become. Consciousness fully aware of itself, free to dream again, but this time awake.